Hello my lovelies. In today's tutorial, I want to show you the fillet pattern I used for this chevron fillet top. You can find the link to the complete pattern in the description section. For this tutorial, I will be using this diagram and this set of written instructions. The fillet mesh is as follows. One block is 1 DC in the next 2 stitches, and one space is a chain 1, skip 1 and a DC. So to simplify that, one block is equal to 2 DCs and one space is a chain 1 and a DC. This particular pattern is in multiples of 16 plus 6 chains. So for this tutorial, I will be repeating this pattern twice. So I have changed 16 into 2, that is 32, plus 6. So a total of 38 chains. I have gone ahead and completed one row of single crochet to set up the pattern. This pattern is in 2 sections, part A and part B. Part A is the repeating section, so you will keep working on part A until you reach the length you want, and part B is made only once to change from the fillet pattern to the solid DCs. Let us begin part A first. I will read the pattern and go through the diagram first, and then I will work them. We'll do this for each row. So row 1 begins with a chain 3, 1 DC in the next stitch. So here is our row 1. Let me center that. So a chain 3 and 1 DC in the next stitch, and then we have one block. So we've already seen one block is 2 DCs, so that would be 2 DCs. So here is our first block, and then we have 2 spaces, so that is a chain 1 DC and chain 1 DC 2 times. So here are our 2 spaces and 3 blocks. So 3 blocks will be 6 DCs. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 DCs. And then 2 spaces. So chain 1 DC and chain 1 DC. So here the brackets ends, and then it says repeat from this to this till you are left with only 3 stitches. So we're going to repeat everything that is within these brackets one more time. So here we have our first block, 2 DCs and then 2 spaces, so chain 1 DC, chain 1 DC, and then we have 3 blocks. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 DCs are 3 blocks and 2 spaces, so chain 1 DC and chain 1 DC, and we are left with 3 stitches in the end. So then we're going to make one block, so 2 DCs. Here's our one block, and it says 1 DC on top of the chain 3. I know it says chain 3 here, but in our very first row we will not have a chain 3 in the end. We will have a single crochet, so basically it means 1 DC in the last stitch. So here we have a DC in the last stitch. So when you're repeating this pattern, the next time you do it, you will have a chain 3 because you have DC rows after this. So let's start working the first row. So we'll begin with a chain 3 and turn 1 DC in the next stitch, 1 block, that is 2 DCs, 1 and 2, 2 spaces, which is chain 1, skip 1 1 DC, and we'll repeat that again because we have 2 spaces. So chain 1, skip 1 and 1 DC. Oops, sorry about that. So here we have our 2 spaces, and then we have 3 blocks, so we will make 6 DCs. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 DCs and 2 spaces. So chain 1, skip 1 DC, chain 1, skip 1 and DC. So we've done what's in the bracket once. We're going to repeat everything in the bracket one more time because I'm repeating the pattern twice here. So we will have 1 block first, so 1 and 2 DCs, and then 2 spaces, so that is chain 1, skip 1, 1 DC, and chain 1, skip 1 and 1 DC because we have 2 spaces, and 3 blocks. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. So that is our 3 blocks, and then we're going to make 2 more spaces. So chain 1, skip 1 DC, and chain 1, skip 1 DC one more time. So here we are left with just 3 stitches in the end. So we're going to make 1 block after this, so that is 2 DCs. So 1 and 2, and we will make 1 DC in the very last stitch. So with this we finish our first row. Maybe you can pause it and watch it again if you want to. We're going to go ahead with row 2. Let me reposition my paper. And here is our row 2. So row 2 begins with a chain 3, 1 DC in the next stitch. So here is our chain 3 and 1 DC in the next stitch. And then we have 2 blocks. So 2 blocks is 4 DCs. So 1, 2, 3, 4. We have our 4 DCs right there. And then we have 1 block. I'm sorry, we have 2 spaces. Sorry about that, I misread the pattern. We have 2 spaces. So we have a chain 1 DC and a chain 1 DC. That is our 2 spaces. And then we have 1 block. So that is our 2 DCs right here. And 2 spaces again. So we have chain 1 DC, chain 1 DC, and 1 block. So 2 DCs is our 1 block. So this is one pattern. So we're going to repeat everything inside the bracket one more time. So we have 2 blocks. So 1, 2, 3, 4 DCs, 2 spaces. So chain 1 DC, chain 1 DC 2 times, 1 block. So that is 2 DCs, 2 spaces, chain 1 DC, chain 1 DC, 1 block. So that is 2 DCs. And with that we finish what is within the brackets, and we are left with 3 stitches in the end. So we will make 1 block, 2 DCs, and 1 DC on top of the chain 3. So that is our last DC. So let's start working this row. So we'll begin with a chain 3 and 1 DC in the next stitch. 2 blocks. So 2 blocks is 4 DCs. So 1, 2, 3 and 4. As you've noticed, I've worked 1 DC inside the chain 1 space, so just follow this 2 DC and chain 1, skip 1 DC. It doesn't matter whether there's a DC or a chain 1 space, just follow the pattern. And then we're going to have 2 spaces, so chain 1, skip 1 DC, chain 1, skip 1 DC. So we have our 2 spaces right here, 1 block next, so 2 DCs, 1 and 2, and then we have 2 spaces, so chain 1, skip 1 DC, and chain 1, skip 1 DC again, and 1 block, so that is 2 DCs. With this we finish the pattern once, and we're going to repeat everything within the brackets one more time. So we'll begin with 2 blocks, so that is 4 DCs, so 1, 2, 3 and 4, and then we have 2 spaces, so chain 1, skip 1 DC, and then chain 1, skip 1 DC. Now we're going to make 1 block, so that is 1 DC and 2 DC. Next we have 2 spaces, so chain 1, skip 1 DC, and chain 1, skip 1 DC one more time, and then we have 1 block, so 1 DC and 2 DC. With this we finish the repeating pattern inside the brackets, and we have only 3 stitches left. So we are here, and now we're going to make 1 block, so that is 2 DCs, 1 and 2, and we will finish with 1 DC on top of the chain 3. With this we finish row 2 of the pattern. Now let's move on to row 3. So row 3 also begins with a chain 3, 1 DC in the next stitch. I'm sure you've noticed a pattern by now. So all the rows begin with a chain 3, 1 DC in the next stitch. So you have something within brackets that you repeat till you are left with 3 stitches. And then you work 1 more block or space, and you finish with 1 DC in the very last stitch. So let's see what we do in row 3. So row 3 begins with a chain 1 DC in the next stitch, and then we're going to begin the repeating pattern. So 1 space, here's our chain 1 DC, 2 blocks, so 2 blocks will be 4 DCs, so 1 2 3 4 DCs, 3 spaces, so we will do chain 1 DC 3 times, so 1 chain 1 DC, chain 1 DC, chain 1 DC 3 times, and then we have 2 blocks, so that is 4 DCs, so 1 2 3 4 DCs, and with that we finish the pattern once, and we're going to repeat it again. So 1 space, that is chain 1 and DC, 2 blocks, so 1 2 3 4 DCs, 3 spaces, so chain 1 DC, chain 1 DC, chain 1 DC, and 2 blocks, so that is 4 DCs, so 1 2 3 4 DCs right here. And with this we finish the repeating pattern inside the brackets, and we have 3 stitches left, and we're going to make 1 space, so chain 1 and DC, and 1 DC in the very last stitch right here. So let's make this row. We begin with a chain 3, DC in the next stitch, and we'll start with one space. So chain 1, skip 1, DC, and we have 2 blocks after this, so that will be 4 DCs. So 1, 2, 3 and 4, and then we have 3 spaces. So chain 1, skip 1, DC, chain 1, skip 1, DC, and chain 1, skip 1, DC one more time. I've lost track of how many times I said chain 1, skip 1, DC. And then we have 2 more blocks, so that is 4 DCs. So 1, 2, 3 and 4. So we finished the repeating pattern, and we're going to repeat this pattern one more time. So we're beginning with 1 space, so chain 1, skip 1, DC, and then we have 2 blocks, so that will be 4 DCs. So 1, 2, 3 and 4, and we're gonna have 3 spaces next. So chain 1, skip 1, DC, chain 1, skip 1, DC, and chain 1, skip 1, DC one more time. So here are our 3 spaces, and we will have 2 more blocks, so that is 4 DCs. So 1, 2, 3 and 4, and now we are left with 3 stitches in the end. So we will make 1 space, which is a chain 1, skip 1 and a DC, and 1 DC in the very last stitch. So here we finished row 3. Let's move on to row 4. Once you start doing this pattern, it's very repetitive and easy to follow. So as always, we're going to begin with a chain 3, 1 DC in the next stitch. So we have our chain 3 here and 1 DC, and we'll begin the pattern. So 2 spaces, so we have a chain 1 DC, chain 1 DC, 2 spaces, 2 blocks, so that would be 4 DCs. 1, 2, 3, 4 are 2 blocks, 1 space. So here we have a chain 1 and DC, 2 blocks, so 4 DCs again. So 1, 2, 3, 4 and 1 space. So that is a chain 1 and a DC. So this is where our pattern ends. So we're going to repeat this pattern one more time. So we have 2 spaces here, so chain 1 DC, chain 1 DC, 2 blocks, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 DCs, 1 space, so chain 1 DC, 2 blocks, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 space, so chain 1 and DC, and with this we have just 3 stitches remaining. So we're at this point now, and we will make 1 space as the pattern indicates. So chain 1 and DC, and we have 1 DC on top of the last stitch. So here's our single DC. Let's go ahead and do that row. So chain 3, 1 DC in the next stitch, and let's begin the pattern. So 2 spaces, that is a chain 1, skip 1 DC, and chain 1, skip 1 DC again, and then we have 2 blocks, so that is 4 DCs. So 1, 2, 3 and 4, and then we have 1 space, so chain 1, skip 1, 1 DC. Now we have 2 blocks, so that is 4 DCs. So 1, 2, 3 and 4, and then we have a space, so chain 1, skip 1 and 1 DC. So we finished this pattern once and we will repeat it again. So we have 2 spaces, that is chain 1, skip 1 and DC, and chain 1, skip 1 DC again, and then we have 2 blocks, so 1, 2, 3 and 4 DCs, and we have a space, 1 space, so chain 1, skip 1 DC 1 time, and 2 blocks, so that is 4 DCs, so 1, 2, 3 and 4, and we have 1 space left, so chain 1, skip 1 and DC. With that we are left with 3 stitches in the end. So we are at this point of the pattern, so we will make 1 space after that, so chain 1, skip 1 and DC, and then we will finish with 1 DC in the end. So with this we've finished pattern A. Sure, you can already see how the chevron pattern is forming. So these 4 rows are your part A, and you will keep repeating these 4 rows as long as you want the chevron to repeat. So once you're happy with the length you have, you can move over to part B. Now let's see how to do part B. If you go through the pattern for part B, you will realize that row 1 of part B is exactly the same as row 1 of part A, and the same goes with row 2. So row 2 of part B is exactly the same as row 2 of part B. So I'm just going to go ahead and do these 2 rows, and I will see you at row 3 of part B. So here I am, I'm back. I have completed row 1 and row 2 of part B, which by the way is exactly the same as part A, as I explained earlier. So now let's move on to part B, row 3. So we're going to begin as always with a chain 3 and 1 DC in the next stitch. So here's our chain 3 and 1 DC. And then we have 3 blocks, so 3 blocks is 6 DCs, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we have 2 spaces after that, 3 spaces, so chain 1 DC, chain 1 DC and chain 1 DC 3 times, and 2 blocks, so that is 4 DCs, so 1, 2, 3, 4, and we will repeat everything inside the brackets one more time. So that is 3 blocks, so 3 blocks is 6 DCs, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 DCs, 3 spaces, so chain 1 DC, chain 1 DC, chain 1 DC 3 times, and 2 blocks, so 1, 2, 3, 4 DCs right here. With that we have finished the repeating pattern and we are left with 3 stitches. So after which we will make one block. So here these are 2 DCs, our one block, and we will finish off with 1 DC on top of the last chain 3. So here that is. So let's work it. So chain 3, 1 DC in the next stitch, and we have 3 blocks, so 6 DCs. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 DCs, and we have 3 spaces, so that is chain 1, skip 1 DC, chain 1, skip 1 DC, and we'll do that one more time. So chain 1, skip 1 DC. So we have our 3 spaces right here, and 2 blocks, so 4 DC. So 1, 2, 3, and 4 DCs, and we're going to repeat everything within the brackets one more time. So 3 blocks is 6 DC. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and we move on to our 3 spaces. So that's chain 1 DC, chain 1 DC, and chain 1 DC again. So our 3 spaces are right here, and 2 blocks, so 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that is our 2 blocks, and we are done repeating. We have only 3 stitches left, so we're going to make one block. So 1 and 2 DCs, and we finish with a DC in the last stitch. So let's move on to the very last row of our chevron pattern. So as always, begin with a chain 3 DC in the next stitch. So chain 3 DC in the next stitch, and our pattern begins with 4 blocks. So that's 8 DCs. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And we have 1 space after that, so chain 1 DC, and 3 blocks, that is 6 DC. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is the pattern once, and we will repeat it again. So that is 4 blocks again. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 DCs again, 1 space, so chain 1 DC, and 3 blocks, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 DCs, and here we have only 3 stitches left, and we will make 1 block after that. So 2 DCs and 1 DC on top of the chain 3 in the end, and that is here. So let's do the very last row of our chevron. So chain 3, 1 DC in the next row, next stitch, and 4 blocks. So that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 DCs in a row, 1 space, so chain 1, skip 1 and DC, and 3 blocks, so that would be 6 DCs. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. So we're gonna repeat everything inside the brackets again. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that is our 4 blocks, and then we have 1 space, so chain 1, skip 1 and DC, and 3 blocks, so 6 DCs. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 DCs, and here we are left with 3 stitches in the end. So we're going to make 1 block as the pattern says. So we have 2 DCs for 1 block, and we will finish with 1 DC in the very last stitch. With this we finish our chevron pattern. So here is our chevron pattern. I hope you found this tutorial useful. Check out my diamond fillet pattern too. I will leave the link in the description. And don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe. Happy hooking!